It was a chilly night in early March. This happened a couple years ago now. I had just gotten home from work. I was working late that night, so it was close to midnight by the time I walked through the door. I was beyond exhausted. I wanted nothing more than to crack open a freezing cold beer and throw my feet up on the couch. So that's exactly what I did. Alcohol always tastes better after a hard day's work. I didn't even turn on the TV immediately. I just sat there on the couch with my eyes closed and my feet elevated, trying to ignore the nagging thoughts about how stressful my life was. I remember getting frustrated while flipping through the channels because nothing was catching my eye. After sifting through for another few minutes, I ultimately gave up and opted to enjoy my beer in silence. Like everything else in my life, peace and quiet was apparently too much to ask for, because not 10 seconds later, all the lights in my house simultaneously shut off. You know that slightly fuzzy popping sound that comes a split second before everything shuts off? Yeah, there's nothing I hate more than hearing that noise. For whatever reason, our house had a tendency to lose power every so often. Now that I think about it, it still does. Anyway, my first reaction was to step outside and see if any of the neighboring houses were affected. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, trying to preserve any heat that I might not be able to get back should I fail to restore the power. It was late, but I remember seeing at least one house on my block with their lights on, which confirmed that my house was the problem. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that this headache would definitely spoil whatever pleasure I was hoping to salvage from the night. I turned back to go inside, but when I turned the handle on the front door, it wouldn't budge. I froze, confused at first. I tried the handle a few more times, but it was definitely locked. What the hell was going on? I banged on the door and called my wife's name, thinking maybe she had woken up without me realizing. There was no answer. I tried to peer through the glass, but it was still pitch black in there. I ran around to the back. That door was locked too. I started panicking. My wife had a tendency to leave doors unlocked, so it was weird that the back door would be locked in the first place. I ran around to the side of the house to check the breaker, and I froze my tracks. My hose, which I knew for a fact had been coiled, was laying in the grass just below the breaker box. The realization hit me like a freight train. Someone had cut the power intentionally. Without thinking, I sprinted to the nearest window and desperately looked inside one more time. This time, I was able to make out two flashlights swinging around wildly in the dark, as if two people were rummaging through my house. They were. I knew they were stealing shit. I was infuriated. The nerve of someone to do this while I was literally home. I reached into my pocket to call the police, only to realize that I had left my phone on the couch. After cursing under my breath, I told myself I'd just run to the neighbor's house and borrow his phone. As I started making my way to the nearest house, another, more sinister thought hit me. My wife was still inside. She was probably asleep, vulnerable to whoever was in the house. I couldn't leave her there even for another minute. I sprinted back to my house and frantically grabbed some loose rocks from the yard. I started chucking them at our bedroom window, hoping to wake her up. After the third rock, she opened the window. Before she had a chance to say anything, I quietly told her what was happening and instructed her to hide in our closet. Her head disappeared immediately. She didn't ask questions. I then sprinted to my neighbor's house and banged on the door. I explained what was going on as quickly as possible, and then I used his phone to call the police. I waited on his porch, praying that my wife would be okay. The police eventually arrived, and I ran out to one of the cars, explaining the situation as best I could. They barged into the house, but by then, it was too late. The back door was wide open, and whoever had broken in was gone, with too many of our valuables to count. My wife was more shaken than I was, and understandably so. What she told me and the police made me angry at myself for not doing a better job at protecting her. To this day, I'll never forgive myself for leaving her in the house with potential murderers. Apparently, mere seconds after I instructed her to hide, she heard someone kick the bedroom door open. The person walked into the room and cocked a gun. He stood there motionlessly for a few seconds, clearly listening for anyone in the room. She said she had never been more terrified in her entire life. I believe the intruders heard me throwing the rocks at the window. The scariest part is that we still live in this house. We're not planning on moving out anytime soon. Sometimes I think about what could have happened had I not stepped outside for those brief moments. This happened a while ago. I want to say 2014. I live in a pretty woodsy town, like with lots of forest around it, and plenty of small campgrounds within an hour or so. I had a 4-day weekend off from work, and I hadn't gotten out in a while, so I decided to head to one of these campgrounds for a laid-back weekend camping trip. The campground I chose was a small one, where you park in a small dirt area and choose one of the 3 sites they had to set up your tent at. There were already fire pits set up, and even some grills and benches. They looked awful, but I guess some people still use them. All 3 spots were open though, and no other cars were there, so I just chose the one on the far left and put all my things over there. The walk from my truck to the campsite was only about 5 minutes, but the area was very densely covered in trees, so it still felt like I was fully in the woods. Plus, the actual camping ground was about 45 minutes from town as well. It was about an hour in that I realized I had no idea what to do. Like, should I just sit here and relax or read a book? I didn't really know. I thought maybe there was a trail or something I could walk on, so I went back to where the entrance was to see if there was anything. There wasn't, but there was another car next to mine now. It was an old red Toyota, like really old, rusted all around and with dents and scratches all over. And one really strange thing I noticed about it was it didn't have a license plate on either the front or the back. I didn't really know what to think, but I figured they must have been camping at one of the other spots. With no trail though, I went back to my campsite and just sat on a log. After only 10 minutes, I heard footsteps coming up behind me. I looked back. There was a guy walking down the trail. He had no backpack or anything, and he was looking right at me, like he was coming down just to talk to me or ask me something. The man looked like he was in his 30s, but he almost looked older because of how he was put together. Or rather, not put together. His brown jacket had holes all over it and was covered in stains, and his beard and hair were oily and shaggy. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would ya?" he asked. Having nothing to do, I said sure and stood off, but he quickly said thank you and that he was just asking for now. He still had some things to do first, but he was going to come back in a little bit and get me when he needed a hand. I said okay, and he thanked me again, then walked away. I wasn't too sure why he came by if he didn't need me right now, but I figured he probably just had to unpack his car first and would be back in 10 or 15 minutes. I sat and waited, but a half hour passed, and then another. By then the sun was going down, and I thought he must have gotten it done himself, whatever it was. 2 hours later, I'd completely forgotten about it. I had the fire pit lit up and was making my dinner when I heard footsteps behind me again. I looked back, but this time it was eerily dark. I could hear his footsteps coming down the trail, but he was completely covered in darkness. I couldn't even see his silhouette. I listened to the crunching steps against the gravel slowly make their way into the light of my campfire. It was the same man, just as I thought. I didn't understand why he came back though. It was so late now. "Hey, you ready? Just need a little help still." With what?" He noticed my hesitation. "It'll only take a minute. You aren't busy by the looks of it," he said jokingly with a smile, but it felt odd, like he was being pushy. He also avoided my question. My social awkwardness kind of failed me here though, because I nervously agreed, knowing I really had nothing else to do, and it was obvious. He smiled again and started leading the way. As we got further from my campfire, it got way darker, and I realized how odd it was that he walked here without a flashlight. It also felt strange following him into the dark. "Hey, so what was it you needed my help for?" I asked. He slowed down for a split second, like he was going to say something, but then he continued walking and didn't answer. I felt my heart rate spiking. My body knew something was wrong. Suddenly, the silence of the forest around me felt disturbingly eerie, like a calm before the storm. I began slowing down, trying to put some distance between us without it being too obvious. I only managed to get a few feet away before he turned around and looked at me. He had a creepy fake smile that immediately shifted into a frown when he saw me further away. He stopped walking, and so did I. Before I could say anything, I saw his hand reach down into his jacket, and I immediately turned and sprinted deeper into the woods after just seeing the handle of what I could only assume was a knife. I could hear his footsteps pounding against the ground and his heavy breathing as he chased me through the dark for probably a good 2 minutes. He started slowing down, and eventually it was just the sound of me running through the woods. Luckily, I had my phone and keys on me, so I called 911. When they got to the camping grounds, only my truck was there. The red car was gone, and so was the man. I described everything for them, as both the car and the man had such a distinct look, but that information wasn't enough. I think it's pretty clear what was about to happen that night, but there doesn't seem to be any reason why, aside from the fact that I was camping alone. The way the man waited until night to try it, and how he came by during the day so that I'd be more likely to follow him later, is terrifyingly manipulative. I'm worried others may fall victim to it, or possibly already have. Me and my older brother, Cameron, were doing a camping trip on the East Coast. Cameron chose the site and everything, like he usually did, and I just tagged along. He chose well, though. The campsite was really nice, and since we had the hike to get there, it wasn't crowded. There was nobody around, from what we could see. The campsite wasn't very defined, though. It was hard to tell if we were even in the right spot. There were several openings in the trees that looked like they could have been the place we were supposed to be at, but neither of us thought it mattered. We set up on one of the grassy openings, and while we initially thought this place wasn't very active, we started to notice we were wrong. There were leftover things scattered around. Nothing big, like entire tents or anything, but just small things, like a trekking pole or some old shoes. It wasn't normal for these things to be left behind, though, not at campsites like this that were far out. We both thought it was weird, but we went on with our day. We didn't really do much, just hung out and talked. When it got darker out, we lit up a fire and sat around it. A couple hours into the night, I happened to spot something behind Cameron. I pointed it out, not sure what it was. Both of us looked, and after a few moments, we were able to tell that it was a small campfire. It was really far out and partially blocked by all the trees, but the tiny orange flame was flickering in the distance. Had it not been for the moonlight being covered by the clouds and the absolute darkness of the woods, there was no way we would have been able to notice it. I guess we weren't alone, though. It was a little odd that they were out in that direction, because it seemed like it was just forest over there, no openings or anything to really set up a campsite. Maybe they wanted to be away from other people or something. We didn't think about it too much. We got some snacks and drinks out and talked ourselves into exhaustion. We put out the fire and went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep pretty comfortably, not having any trouble at all, though I woke up at some point in the night. It must have only been an hour or two after I'd gone to sleep. I knew exactly why I'd woken up, though. I drank a bit too much right before bed. Needing to relieve myself, I got up and unzipped the tent. I walked out maybe 50 feet from the campsite to make sure I didn't attract any animals, and did my business. But as I was out there, I noticed the flame way out in the forest was still lit up. Maybe it was because I was tired, or just out of it for some reason, but I stood there and stared at it for a minute. I don't even know why, but my eyes began adjusting to the dark as I stood there, and as I looked out into the woods, I suddenly noticed something else. It looked like a figure somewhere far out between me and the distant flame I was looking at. I felt a shock for a moment, but I told myself it couldn't actually be a person and had to be a weird-looking bush or something. Like there was no way someone was out in the dark outside our camp at this time of night. But I kept looking, trying to make out what I could, when I started to notice more of these figure-looking shadows in the woods. They were so far, and it was so dark, I couldn't tell if my mind was just playing tricks on me. If they were people, though, there were at least 10 or 15 of them, and they seemed to all be looking right at me. Another shock ran through me. What the hell is this? I almost thought I was hallucinating. I turned around and hurried back to the tent. I debated for a second whether to wake Cameron up. I knew if it was nothing, I would never hear the end of it, but my gut was telling me otherwise. I opened his tent and shook him awake. He was really confused at first, but I just told him I thought I saw something and wanted a second opinion. He hesitantly got up, and I started to lead him out to where I was, but we didn't get very far. The figures I had seen had moved. They were closer, standing all spread out among the trees. I really hoped at this point I was just seeing things, but I slowly looked back at Cameron and could see the pale, fear-covered expression on his face, his eyes wide open. He saw what I saw. I looked back out, and it was more apparent than ever that these were people. I could see their subtle movements as they stood there and watched us. We backed up towards our tents. Should we leave? I can still vividly remember Cameron's shaky voice as he spoke those words. He was always so confident and sure of what to do. It was terrifying seeing and hearing him like that. I nodded, and neither of us grabbed any of our stuff, aside from the car keys and our wallets. We hurried away and down the trail. It seemed that they didn't follow us. We reported what happened to the police, feeling it was necessary. They didn't take it too seriously, though, very clearly thinking we were crazy. Like there was no way a whole group of people were out in the woods at night messing with us. We thought about the strange amount of left-behind things we saw in the area, and had hoped others had already gone to the police about similar encounters. But nobody had. There were no official accounts of anything happening there. Maybe they just went unreported. Or maybe nobody ever made it back to report it. Mary was born in a black and white room, and scientists didn't let her see colors until she turned 18. She saw something we didn't. Mary's room, also known as the knowledge argument, is a philosophical concept concerning a hypothetical woman named Mary, who has never seen color. She has only ever existed in a black and white room. Mary studies the world through books and a monochromatic television screen. She reads about colors, but she does not experience them visually. Can the universe be fully understood in purely physical terms? The answer differs, depending on whether one believes that we know fundamental truths about reality, a priori, without experience, or a posteriori, with experience. In other words, will Mary learn anything about color when she leaves the black and white room? It was a thought experiment. Nobody was supposed to actually do it. However, in 2007, A group of researchers sought to answer that question, and the experiment they conducted would have been condemned by boards of ethics across the globe. But these were not ethical scientists, and this was no ethical organization. I would have decried its actions back then. This wasn't why I joined the agency, but I was afraid. After all, they were willing to put an innocent baby in a colorless prison cell, doomed to grow up in near solitary confinement, save for a nurse dubbed Nanny. What would they have done to a whistleblower? I don't know how they found the baby, and I don't want to know whether a parent willingly gave her up, or one of the scientists intentionally bred her for the experiment. The result remains the SAME, a baby named Mary. In honor of the philosophical concept which inspired the horrifying experiment, was placed in a white, windowless, foam-padded cell. She was blindfolded whenever her nurse entered the room to provide food, formula, and fresh clothes, always the same black onesie, with coverings like mittens and socks to cover her hands and feet. She was also made to wear a facial covering, akin to a balaclava, which covered her face. There was no mouth slit, to avoid her seeing the color of her lips, and she wore black contacts in her eyes. Equally, Nanny wore the exact same attire every time she entered the room. To put it simply, Mary's daily outfit was horrid, barely any more humane than a straitjacket and a bag over the head. There was no room for error. Mary was watched by at least one person at all hours of day and night. Should she get curious and try to sneak a peek at the color of her skin or eyes, she would receive 100 volts in the collar attached to her neck. But more terrifyingly than that was the simple fact that Mary was well-trained. So well-trained that she never, in her 18 years of imprisonment, even attempted to take a peek at her skin. She was such a willing prisoner, having never known anything else, that I think she would have stayed in her room even if the door had been standing ajar. This initially seemed excessive, given that copious measures had been taken to ensure no reflective surfaces would be allowed within the room. Even the television monitor was fitted with an anti-glare screen. However, scientists were paranoid that Mary might, somehow, catch a glimpse of her green eyes. Even seeing her pale, peach-colored skin would have dirtied the results of the experiment. Black and white, those were the only shades that Mary was permitted to see. And when Mary started walking and talking, Nanny stopped, entering the room entirely. Fresh food and clothes were delivered through a horizontal slit in the steel door, and Mary was always instructed to wear a blindfold before changing or using the bathroom, which comprised of a white porcelain toilet and a black shower head fixed to the foam wall. Revoltingly, both were exposed in that titchy room of hers. Her entire world was a box, stretching a mere 4 meters across all 3 dimensions. I wanted to save her numerous times over the years, wanted to leave that horrid place behind, but I'm a coward. Besides, we wouldn't have got far. There's no running from these people, and the agency isn't even the greatest horror of this story. On Mary's 18th birthday, Drive Robson delivered a thrilling message over the speaker. "Happy birthday, Mary," he said in a monotone lacking empathy. "Thank you," the girl meekly responded. "Will there be chocolate cake this year?" I wasn't fond of the lemon last year, you see. Today, we'll be celebrating in a different way," Mary Robson replied. "Do you know your age?" "I'm 18, she croaked. "Does that mean—" "Yes, Mary," Dr. Robson said. "Today, you leave the room. I'll see color?" she asked rather innocently. Any sane and well-developed human in the outside world would have simply been glad to have freedom. But Mary had no concept of freedom, no concept of a prison. She had no understanding that this childhood had been abnormal, worse than abnormal, inhuman. To keep Mary compliant, her schooling had been rigid, with books that purposefully omitted any dangerous ideas. The result of that, a girl relishing at the opportunity to not escape from her prison, but to simply see color. "Yes, Mary, you will see color. Nanny is already on her way to fetch you," Dr. Robson said. We watched live footage, filmed on a closed-circuit camera, from our operational room. Nanny unlocked the weighty entrance to Mary's room, and we all waited with bated breath, as Nanny aided Mary in removing her black headgear. I heard Mary giggling giddily and unnervingly as the bag was removed from her head, and the contacts were removed from her eyes. And then, As her first experience with a color other than black or white, Nanny removed her own black outfit to revealing a striking red dress beneath. Mary gasped. It was an intake of breath so sharp that she seemed to stop breathing. Perhaps, for a moment, she had stopped breathing. "What are you experiencing?" Drive Robson asked. "Is it new? Does it feel like—" "I knew it," Mary whispered, with vocal cords that sounded as if they were on the verge of snapping. Then her giggling picked up again, seeming to unnerve Nanny. "This is why you did the experiment, isn't it? Does this feel like a new experience, Mary?" Robson asked with a hint of impatience, seemingly oblivious to Nanny's discomfort. "It was plainly clear to me, even through grainy camera footage." Mary shot her teary face up to the camera. "Yes, but I've been waiting for it." "Yes, I know that, Mary," Robson groaned. "But so have I. Tell me about it. Tell me about the red. How does it feel to experience true color for the first time? We're seeing some interesting brain activity on the screen here, but your words would really help us to—" "I'm not talking about the red," Mary interjected, and then she jabbed an accusatory finger at Nanny's dress in a way that frightened me. Certainly frightened Nanny, who jumped backwards. "I'm talking about that," she giggled. "I knew there was something you were leaving out of the books and TV shows over the years." "What are you saying, Mary?" Robson asked. "I don't understand a red." "You're looking at red. Red and the second color," she insisted. "The color you didn't describe in the books. None of the adjectives you've used describe this one. Red is just as stark, powerful, and passionate as described. The blue color of Nanny's eyes is as soothing and tender as described. But this other color on her dress is just—" "What other color?" Robson cried. "It's just red, Mary. Right here," Mary yelled as she lunged forwards and prodded Nanny in the abdomen. The woman in the red dress jumped backwards, clutching her stomach, and then Mary's eyes went wide. "Oh," she whimpered. "What, Mary?" Robson asked. "Please tell us what you're seeing." "What I saw," she whispered, moving her finger up to Nanny's face. "It moved up there, and now it's gone." "Please describe this other color to us, Mary," Robson said, before putting an image up on Mary's television set. "Which one of those is it?" Mary's eyes shot to the television screen and quickly scanned the 12 main colors. "On the screen, it's not one of those, not a different shade of one of those. It's a different color. There are 10 million possible permutations of colors, Mary," Robson said. "Perhaps you just—" "No, Dr. Robson," the girl interrupted, panting heavily as her eyes darted back to Nanny's face, studying it. "I understand how shades work. The shade of blue on the screen differs from the color of Nanny's eyes, but that other color, it wasn't included on the screen. It was—" Mary stopped, and her eyes widened. Then she said, "I'm sorry." Nanny frowned. "That's okay, Mary. I know you didn't mean to." "Not you," Mary hissed, before leaning forwards and trying to look into Nanny's mouth. I'm sorry I saw you, Mary." "You're not making any sense," Dr. Robson said. "I think we've done enough for today. We'll do more tomorrow." "So I wasn't supposed to see it," Mary moaned, shooting backwards, clunking into the foam wall, then seizing clumps of her straggly hair. "Oh, God, why don't you see it? It's Nanny, it's in you." Nanny looked up at the camera. "I'd like to step outside now, Dr. Robson." Dr. Robson sighed, then pinched the bridge of his nose between two fingers. "Fine, Nanny." Nanny had already spun on her heel to leave. She would have done so, regardless of whether Robson gave her permission, as Mary was clearly disturbing her. But she barely took one step before her body fixed itself to the floor. And then Nanny juddered, like a fleshy bobblehead. I was overcome by a warm sensation across my skin, and moments later, there came a thunderous explosion. Skin flew into the walls from a red eruption of dress fragments, blood, and guts. Nanny had spontaneously imploded. Screams filled the operating room. Some fled, some fainted, and others simply froze. I don't even know whether any of them noticed it. Noticed Mary clawing out her eyes, leaving streaks of blood and tears across her cheeks as, mere minutes after seeing color for the first time, she ensured that she would never see anything else ever again. "I'm sorry," the eyeless woman wailed. "I didn't know I wasn't allowed. Please, I'll never see you again." As I saw a trail of blood run fro, Nanny's destructed. Corpse towards the front door, clearly painted by something unseen. A deep dread filled my chest. I realized that my fleeing colleagues had the right idea, so I fled in fear, leaving Dr. Robson and my frozen co-workers behind. I don't remember leaving the building, getting in my car, and going home, but I must have done those things. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, wouldn't be posting this for all of you. It's been 4 hours. 4 hours since Mary saw color for the first time. Saw a color that none of us saw. What was it? Why could only Mary see it? I work at a hotel, and I've been watching a man on the cameras run on the hotel gym's treadmill for hours. I work the graveyard shift at a small, usually mostly empty hotel just off the highway. The hours suck, obviously, but other than that it's a pretty cushy job. I clock in, settle down in the back office and watch downloaded movies or shows on my laptop. The connection sucks back there, but it's a place I can sit out of view of the guests and relax. So I just prepare accordingly. Periodically, I'll glance at the CCTV monitor hung on the wall in front of my desk. Mostly it's just to see if there's anyone at the front desk that needs anything, or to see when my co-workers arrive in the morning so I can brush the Cheeto dust off my shirt and pretend like I wasn't half asleep only moments before they arrived. The cameras show several other areas of the hotel too, each stairwell, several shots of the parking lot outside and each exit door, the kitchen, laundry room, the lobby, and a few other areas. There's also a camera in the gym, but no one ever uses it. The hotel I work for isn't really known for their stellar cleanliness or functioning facilities. Our pool hasn't been open to guests in months, and our gym has like one functioning treadmill, a couple weights, and I think a pull-up bar. I've been working here for a few months, and I don't think I've ever been inside. Anyway, at about 2 a.m. 2 hours into my shift, I glance up from my show to check the cameras and notice that the light in the gym is on. The grainy footage shows a man, average looking, maybe on the older and fatter side, running on the one working treadmill. I don't recall checking him in, but I'm not the one who usually handles that stuff. Most people are in before my shift anyway. Whatever, I thought, I can hardly judge him. Looks like he's doing more exercise than I ever do. I go back to my show, getting up once to grab another bag of chips from the concession area. When I get back, I check the time, to 2:30 a.m. The one instance of actual work I do starts at 3, when I run the nightly audit on the computers. So I have to start keeping track of the time more closely. Around then, I spare a glance towards the cameras, and I'm surprised to see that the man is still running on the treadmill. Well, probably not still, right? Like he probably took a break to do other workouts, and now he's back to running? Or maybe he's been running this whole time. I don't know shit about exercise. In the crappy video quality, I could still see that he was sweating pretty hard. His shirt was almost an entire shade darker, and his thinning hair was visibly slicked back. At the time, all I thought was, good for him, I guess. Maybe this old fat guy should be motivating me to start working out for real. I finish another episode before getting up to start the audit process, which usually takes me a couple minutes. Before I left the office, I checked the cameras again, just because I didn't like being surprised by a guest waiting for me at the desk whenever I went up. My eye immediately caught onto the treadmill guy, not just because he was still running, which was odd enough. I mean, it had been a full hour of, I'm pretty sure, non-stop running at a pretty quick pace for a guy like him. No, it's because this time he was staring straight at me. Well, not me, but the camera in the corner of the gym. I froze. We locked eyes, even though I obviously knew he couldn't see me. He was dead-eyed with a slack, exhausted expression on his face, and yet he was still running. His arms no longer swinging along with his run, but instead hanging limply at his sides. I stood there for a long few seconds, confused and creeped out by what I was seeing, right before I decided to write this guy off as a weirdo and turn away from the monitor to go do my job. He fucking smiled at me, at the camera. I mean, this creepy, wide smile that didn't really reach his eyes. And the worst part was that his tongue just sort of limply flopped out of his mouth, as if the only thing holding it in was his closed lips. It just bounced around like he had no control over it, moving to the rhythm of his jog. It was also way too long, like a normal tongue would just stay in a person's mouth. If it was completely relaxed, right? Needless to say, I was really creeped out by this guy. I don't know how long he was staring at the camera in the corner, or why he decided to smile right as I noticed him doing it. Obviously, it was just weird timing. Or he probably just decided to fuck with whoever might be watching the cams right at the moment that I looked up at him. But somewhere deep inside me, I felt like I was actually being watched, that it was about to be 3 a.m. And if I didn't have the audit done by 3:15, I'd get another write-up and probably yelled at my boss about how it's literally the only thing I have to do all night. As anxious as this guy was making me feel, I didn't want to take my eyes off of him in case. I didn't even know why, honestly. However, I swallowed my nerves and tore my eyes away from the screen and fast-walked my way to the front desk with my mind made up to do the audit as quickly as possible. Let me describe the layout real quick here. The back office is around the corner from the front desk, down the hallway, past the elevators, the lobby where we do breakfast, the pool, and the laundry room is where the gym is. It's not the most well-designed hotel, and there's a few twists and turns leading to the gym at the other end of the first floor. That makes directing guests verbally an annoying task. That also meant that as I stepped out to the front desk, I didn't have a straight shot to be able to see the gym. On the one hand, I was relieved that I was kind of far away from the weirdo, and on the other, I was made even more anxious that he was now no longer in my sights. I booted up the ancient computer and started printing reports, filing them away in various folders with one hand and signing stuff that needed to be signed with the other. I'm sure I got some stuff wrong, but my priority was finishing this quickly so I could return to the office. I felt exposed out here, couldn't see anything but the lobby. The sound of some pop radio playing way too loud, drowning out any other potential noise. Every second for the 10 minutes that I was out there, I felt like something really wrong was about to happen. I had to bring some of these reports back to the office to file them away, while the audit process was running on the computers. Normally I just did this at the end of the process, to not make as many trips back and forth, and because as soon as the process ended I had to update the system to roll over to the next day. If I didn't do that part, within a minute of the process ending, the whole thing would get fucked up. This time though, as soon as the computer started processing, I raced back to the office to check on the cameras again, if only just to confirm that he was still doing the same thing. Asterisk, the first thing I noticed when I got back was that the light in the gym had turned off. I hadn't heard the heavy gym door open and close from the front desk, but maybe the stereo was just too loud to hear it. I began scanning the rest of the displays, trying to find him on his way back to his room, in the stairwell or the elevators or wherever, just to give me some peace of mind. At first, I didn't see him anywhere on the cameras until my eyes glanced back at the gym display. It was subtle, but the dim light on the treadmill display that indicated that it was in use looked like it was still on. I thought that maybe he just forgot to turn it off when he left, and then I saw him. He was still in there, still running. I just hadn't seen him at first in the dark. His body was barely lit by the treadmill, but that's not why I noticed him. His eyes were to pinpricks of light reflecting off the display, still staring directly at me. I choked back a gasp when I saw that. Why had the lights shut off while he was still in there? They were motion sensors. Maybe if he was standing perfectly still they'd turn off eventually. But there he was, still running at the same pace. He was clearly exhausted, his whole body drooping forward as his arms swung back and forth. But his legs continued moving at the same speed as they were an hour ago when I first noticed him. And his head was craned at an unnatural angle to keep staring at me. In the back of my mind, I considered that maybe this man needed help, some sort of mental illness thing that made him keep running. But my fear kept me rooted to the spot, not breaking eye contact. I still had the audit process to complete, but there was no way I was taking my eyes off of him again. What the fuck? I muttered under my breath, but as the last word left my mouth, he suddenly stopped running and fell off of the treadmill, landing headfirst on the tile floor. The cameras didn't record sound, but I could swear I heard a crack. In my shock, It took way too long to react to the lights coming back on, and him standing with his neck clearly broken and his head limply hanging backwards off of it. As soon as he stood, he ran out of the room, passing the laundry camera, the pool, and making it halfway through the lobby before I broke out of my paralysis to run and slammed the door to the office shut, locking it in the process. A slam against. The door shook the office to seconds after I had closed it, and then another and another, like he was using his body as a battering ram. I looked back at the cameras, but there were none pointing directly at the back office's entrance. The only thing I could see was the trail he left of blood and what looked like shit, all the way from the gym to the lobby. The entire room shook with the force of this fucking thing slamming itself against the door, and every call I tried to make to the police failed again and again. The door was heavy, but I didn't have faith in it holding up for that long if he kept going at this rate. I just kept looking back and forth between the door and the cameras, selfishly hoping that a guest would notice the commotion and draw this thing's attention away from me. I don't know what would happen to them if they did, but at the moment I was only focused on getting the fuck out of the hotel. After a few minutes, 3 to be exact, the banging stopped. It took a second for me to notice, but once I did, my eyes shot to the monitor. He was definitely still there, since there were no bloody footprints leading away from the back office. I wish I could forget just how long I stood there, staring at the screen and willing it to show this thing walk away. But the display on the bottom right of the monitor showed me each excruciating minute, which is how I knew exactly what time another guest started making his way down to the lobby. At 6:28 a.m., I noticed movement on the camera that was pointing at the third-floor elevator. A young man, dressed in workout clothes, carrying a gym towel. My heart sank, and I began to think of ways to warn him or somehow prevent this thing from doing whatever it was trying to do. I could have pulled the fire alarm. I could have grabbed a chair or something to use as a weapon and jumped out at it. Hell, I could have at least stopped watching. I didn't do any of those things. I watched as the man entered the elevator at the third floor and descended down to the lobby. The second those elevator doors opened, the creature that had been standing in front of my office door for the past 3 hours and 18 minutes made its move with a speed I could barely keep up with over several camera displays. Its mangled body ran on perfectly functioning legs towards the guest, slamming into walls and leaving a bloody imprint on them. As it went, the guest made it 1 foot off of the elevator before this thing tackled him back into it. I only saw a spray of blood hit the opposite wall as the elevator door slowly closed again. This was my chance to get the fuck out of the hotel and never look back. But again I found myself rooted to the ground in fear. I couldn't bring myself to tear my eyes away from the monitor, so I watched as the elevator door slowly opened once again. The guest walked out, just the same as he had walked in. He had the same chipper smile on his face, and I watched as he walked past the front desk, past the lobby, and the pool, and the laundry room, all the way to the gym. I was out the door and on my way to never coming back again before I could see him enter. I'm writing this in my car a few miles away from the hotel because I couldn't stand to go home yet, but I figured I should make my version of events public just in case. I know that man is running on the treadmill right now, and my co-workers or whoever else comes into the hotel next is going to have to deal with what I went through all over again. But I can't bring myself to care. I even feel claustrophobic to stay inside my car at this point after spending so long in the back office. My legs are still shaking, and the only thing I want to do right now is run as fast and as far away as I can.